everybody, my name is Gia. I'm a 25-year-old lady who lives in my mom's basement, and I create booktube content here on YouTube. And I also post my variety content from Twitch, where I also create content. This is the reading vlog for A Court of Thorns and Roses, mostly just because when I was talking about it, when I was recording the wrap-up, I was talking about it way too much, and I was talking about it over the course of several days in more of a reading vlog style, so I felt like it didn't truly belong in the wrap-up and deserved its own video. So I decided to kind of summarize how I felt about it in the wrap-up and then take all of that video and make it its own video. As a result, this will seem a little bit choppy. I am still trying to figure out like how I want to go about my overlays and like how I want everything to look. So as you can see, that little green strip at the bottom is no longer there anymore. And I'm still trying to figure out how to make the camera quality a little bit better, but I think I'm starting to get on my way there. I just wanted to give a little brief introduction before hopping into the video. I did also want to issue a content warning. There is a brief scene about halfway into the book that has a instance of SA. If you are sensitive to this, I would not read the book if this bothers you, but it is just one instance. It's fast. It only happens once. It's an invasion of privacy. So if you are uncomfortable with that, then be warned that this is something that I do talk about. There is also a part of this video where I am doing my makeup and the instance that I just talked about with the content warning is mentioned. This is not to show that I am not taking it seriously, because I do, and I do go in depth about this later. But that's just what I was doing when I was talking about the book. But I do take it seriously and I do talk about it later. But I just didn't want anyone to think that I don't take that kind of thing seriously, because I do. So yeah, if you'd like to continue watching, this is the intro to the reading vlog. It's a long one, so have fun. At this point in time, I'm about 31% of the way through the book right now. It's been not slow moving. I've just had a lot going on like over the past couple of days, but I started it about 2 or 3 days ago. But I am enjoying it so far. I'm not going to go about like a plot summary, and I'm not going to talk about like what the series is about. Like, we know. I'm absolutely kidding. So to recap lightly, we are in a world where fairy exists. The high fae and the humans have been separated for hundreds of years. There's a lot of bad blood between the high fae and the fairies and humans, so they don't really like communicate with each other, and they don't want to. Apparently the fairies used to kill humans and enslave them, and there was this treaty that split them apart, split apart their worlds. But you know, there's whisperings in the forest and whisperings in the world that like the fairy are going to invade and like take back what they believe is to be theirs, which is the humans as slaves. Father's name is never spoken. The mother is dead because one parent has to be dead in these series. Then you have 3 sisters. I think Elaine is the oldest. I think Nesta is the middle child. She has middle child syndrome. I was wrong, so let me backtrack. So Nesta is the eldest, Elaine is the middle child, and then Feyre is the youngest. Nesta, who's a raggedy fucking bitch, hate her with every breath that I have. She sucks. And then you have Elaine, who's the boring middle child, who's the mediator. And then you have Feyre, who is the baby. So they tell you that this family used to be rich, and now they are not, because apparently Daddy got into some trouble, and some hooligans broke into the house and crippled him. I guess they like broke his kneecaps, and now he walks with a limp and a cane, and he can no longer work. So the family is destitute and poor. The mother died. Feyre was never sent to like a formal school. She never got a formal education, so she can't read or write. But she is the one who has the sole responsibility for caring for her family. She gave her mother a wish on her deathbed that she would care for her family, and as a result, they take advantage of her at every turn. So when we enter the series, we have Feyre in the woods, and she is hunting. She is hunting a deer, and she finds the deer, but something else also finds her and the deer. It is a massive wolf, or she thinks it's a wolf. She's not quite sure if it's fairy or wolf, but she hopes that it's a wolf, because if she kills a fairy, then that can have a lot of repercussions. So she kills the wolf. She makes a split-second decision, and she uses her arrows, specifically her ash arrow that's meant to harm fae, and she kills it. And then her thinking is that if it's just a wolf, it's just a wolf. But if it's a fae, then good riddance, is basically what she says. So she goes back home, she skins the wolf, she takes the deer, they eat the deer, and then she sells the wolf pelt. Well, then Somebody comes and knocking on her door and says, "You raggedy fucking bitch, you killed my fey friend who was the wolf. You need to come with me now because a life for a life." This is when we meet Tamlin, who is a high lord of the fey court. He is a part of the spring court. So he is the lord of this estate, and there is a blight going throughout the land where they are like cursed to wear these masks because they were cursed while they were at a masquerade. So now they have to wear these masks. And I thought that was pretty cool. Feyre is trying to find answers as to whether she can go back to her family because she feels as though she made her mother this promise and she has to go back to her family. But Tamlin is telling her that, like, I meant it, like, a life for a life. Like, you came here and gave your life to me to live forever in Feylands, and as a result, I'm taking care of your family. So if you try to escape, your family will not be cared for anymore, and you'll go back to starving on the streets. But for some reason, Feyre can't get that through her fucking head, so she's constantly, like, trying to think of ways to escape and, like, how to break the treaty that binds her there because she killed a fae, like life for a life. So as a result of like this blight that's coming through, the lands are also getting weaker. So the fences essentially to the high fae court and all their lands has become weaker, and a lot of like mysterious creatures have like come in through the gates, and so it's not really safe to leave the estate, which completely understandable. I wouldn't either. That's fucking weird. But anyway, I know I said I wouldn't talk about the plot of the book. I know I said I wouldn't talk about it. But like I have a couple of notes. I made a false assumption about this first one. My first part said Nesta is a raggedy bitch, but so is Lucy, and so they're perfect for each other. I misremembered that I know Nesta ends up with Cassian, who we have not met yet. So spoiler alert for that. But Lucy and Cassian, like their names rhyme. Sorry. But I stand by what I said. Nesta is a raggedy bitch, and I can't stand her. I said, I know Feyre ends up with Rhysand, but I am enjoying Tamlin right now. Also, Tamlin has daddy issues. We love that. Feyre has mommy issues and Tamlin has daddy issues. Oh my god. I know this is like a first arc romance and like they don't end up together in the end, but like, oh, we love that. I said, for a bitch you can't read, Sarah J. Maas writing with words like everescent really are ironic. It was this part in the library where Feyre wants to write a letter to her family, but she doesn't know how because she doesn't know how to read. And then literally on the same page, like Sarah J. Maas uses the word effervescent. Okay, Stephanie Meyer. So she uses this word, and I just found it so ironic that like for Feyre being a bitch who can't read or write, Sarah J. Maas like writing in the first person perspective with Feyre's voice using big words like that is ironic, and I find that hilarious. Also, S.J. Maas loves her adjectives to an extreme, and I will read you an example that really just like set me off here. It was this specific passage right here where I realized that Sarah J. Maas loves her descriptors and her adjectives, but it's the scene in page 47, it's about 11% into the book. It says, my awe might have subdued my fear had the place not been so wholly empty and silent. Even the garden through which we walked, following a gravel path to the main doors of the house, seemed hushed and sleeping. Above the array of amethyst, irises, and pale snowdrops and butter yellow daffodils swaying in the balmy breeze, the faint stench of metal tickled my nostrils. That is one of the wordiest sentences I've ever read in my life. Like literally just amethyst, irises, and pale snowdrops and butter yellow daffodils swaying in the balmy breeze. The faint stench of metal tickled my nostrils. And it says ticked my nostrils, by the way. It says ticked my nostrils. Just a note, not a criticism. Also, my last note, which I thought was kind of funny, was I hear Tamlin's claws. And the last note I have at about 30% of the way through this book is I hear about Tamlin's claws about as often as I hear about eyes flashing. So everybody knows about that whole stereotype about like their eyes flashed and there was a flash of anger in their eyes and you could, there's a flash and you guys know what I'm talking about. With the amount of times I have heard you have heard typically about like eyes flashing is the amount of times we have heard about Tamlin's claws. And it's like Tamlin's claws about whether he's keeping them sheathed or something. It's like an indicator of emotion where Feyre is like monitoring whether or not he's like half shifting into his animal form, because Tamlin's one of his gifts is shape shifting. So like Feyre's paying exceptional attention to whether or not like he is like in the midst of shifting, like whenever he gets angry or like irritable or something. So she's like, yeah, he kept his claws sheathed, or his claws barely poking out of his hands. It's like, is that a problem that he has, where he has just like his claws coming in and out of his hands like every time somebody irritates him or like something? I know it's probably just a figure of speech, but it has the same energy. I am 69% of the way through A Court of Thorns and Roses, and things are starting to get a little interesting. So when I first started the book, from like the beginning to about the 20-ish% mark when I updated you before, I was enjoying it, but between 20% and 45%, I was like, having like a 6 to 7 out of 10 experience. Like things were happening, but I felt like I was just waiting for the plot to start, and it felt like it honest to God felt like that musical sequence in Beauty and the Beast where Belle is spending more time with the Beast, and it's just like their day-to-day activities and stuff. It's like Feyre having breakfast and lunch with Tamlin and Lucien, and then she goes to paint, and then she runs into a weird creature that's not supposed to be there, and Tamlin has to go off and fight something, and then it starts all over again. So it was giving me backstory, but it wasn't giving me advancement. You know, like I wasn't like having a lot going on. If anything, I was getting a bit more character development about Feyre, and I do like her as a character. I do like her as a protagonist. But what really like turned it for me was at about the 50% mark, almost precisely at the 50% mark. You had the ceremony where Tamlin had to fuck some random girl for like the magic to seep back into the land so that they could have good harvests and shit. Feyre goes because Tamlin's really bad. Like he always is telling Feyre what to do. Not that she's gonna listen, but like she would listen if he explained. And I think that's part of their miscommunication, is the fact that he's always trying to keep her out of danger, but she does not give a fuck. But if he had explained literally anything, anytime he told her something, like when he was trying to tell her what to do, she probably would have listened. But all he told her was like, stay in your room, lock the door, don't come out. And she was like, that's fucking stupid. I'm not staying in here, you dumb bitch. So of course she's gonna like find herself in danger. And who saves her is this mysterious guy, this mysterious fairy, and I knew it was Rhysand, and that was when I was like, okay, all right, it's immediately gotten interesting. But it got more interesting when Rhysand showed up at the Spring Court and realized that Feyre was actually living there, because he did not ask her. She lied to him about who she was and how she was there at the ceremony in the first place. But like when he found her at the Spring Court, he was like, oh, this is interesting. Okay. And then he made Tamlin like get on his hands and knees and beg to not tell Amarantha that she was there. And Rhysand was like, I'll think about it, but thanks for kneeling though. Like I was like, okay, he's a villain. We get it. All right. So later, when Tamlin sends Feyre away, and she goes home, and the family of the girl that she lied to Rhysand about her identity, being that she said that she was that girl, her name was Claire, their family is killed. The entire manor burns down to the ground, and every person inside dies. And Feyre was just like, oh shit, I gotta go back. Okay. So this is when this was the moment that I had to turn on the camera and talk about it, because I was like, oh, okay, like we see Rhysand now. Like I know Feyre ends up with him, so like I'm like, okay, it's nice to see like the beginning of this character, that he's very much a villain. We're supposed to not like him, but like I do know he ends up with Feyre in the end. So I'm just like, and that's a little bit of information that I don't, but I don't know how we get there. So what made me have to turn on the camera and stop reading in this sprint to try to finish this book and another book, was when Alice was explaining to Feyre Tamlin's curse, about how Tamlin's curse was basically he had to get a human woman to love him, which simple, but the way that she described it, where she was like, he has to hold on, let me just pull it up. So the scene in which this takes place is at the masquerade that Amarantha holds as an apology to Lucian because she carved out his eye and she made it a masquerade so that nobody would see his scars, which clever, admittedly. But it's at the part where Amarantha is basically announcing to everyone that she's going to curse Tamlin if he doesn't accept her as a lover and a consort, and he's like, I hate you. But then it says, when she tried to touch him, he refused to let her near, not after what she'd done to Lucian. He said in front of everyone that night that he would sooner take a human to his bed, sooner marry a human, than ever touch her. She might have let it go had he not then said that her own sister had preferred a human's company to hers, that her own sister had chosen Jurian over her. But then it got even worse, because then Amarantha said that he had 7 times 7 years before she claimed him. So it was 49 years. They keep talking about like 49 years, which I don't understand what the... Actually, no. Actually, maybe that does make a little bit of sense, because there's 7 High Lords. So she basically just had 7 times the number of High Lords, I guess. He had 7 times 7 years before she claimed him, before he had to join her under the mountain. If he wanted to break her curse, he only needed to find a human girl willing to marry him, but not any girl. A human with ice in her heart, with hatred for our kind. A human girl willing to kill a fairy. Worse, the fairy she killed had to be one of his men, sent across the wall by him like lambs to slaughter. The girl could only be brought here to be courted if she killed one of his men in an unprovoked attack, killed him for hatred alone, just as Jurian had done to Clythea, so he could understand her sister's pain. The treaty, that was all a lie. There was no provision for that in the treaty. You could kill as many innocent fairies as you want and never suffer the consequences. You just killed Andreas, sent out by Tamlin as that day's sacrifice. This was interesting, but I also hated it because it had like there was like a million parts to this curse. It was like, okay, no. You can't just get the human girl to love you. She has to first kill one of your own, not just a fairy, but one of your friends. One that you send out to be sent as a sacrificial lamb. So like I was like, okay, Beauty and the Beast, you know, there was a Beauty and the Beast element where like he had to get Feyre to love him, or he had to get a human girl to love him in general. But the fact that it was part of the curse that he had to be the one every day to send out one of his friends to die, in the hopes that some person, like some human girl, killed him, and his friends knew what was up and they were willing to do it. That was just bonkers to me. I was like, yeah, it's clever and it makes sense, but it felt like there was just so many criteria under this curse in order for it to be broken that almost made it completely impossible for it to be broken. And so it seems almost coincidental that all of this has happened to Feyre, instead of it being like pure chance or she was chosen. Like, it was literally just she ticked off every part of the criteria to break Tamlin's curse, and then he just happened to love her. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if there was a point in time where Feyre questioned whether Tamlin actually loved her, because it wasn't just he had to fall in love with her, she had to fall in love with him. And if, you know, she comes in ticking off all these criteria for the curse to be broken, like, wouldn't you, if you were Tamlin, like, gaslight yourself into loving that person? So I can only imagine how Feyre can feel knowing that she fell into the situation out of pure coincidence, and then she may or may not accept that Tamlin actually loves her, or if it's just a consequence of that coincidence that he's convinced himself to love her in order to break his curse, which would make him seem a bit more self-interested than he's been presented as a character. I don't think that that is who he is, but I could be wrong. I mean, I've only read like a little over half of the first book in a many book long series, so I probably will be proven wrong. But at this point, it was just really it made me laugh a little because I was like, oh, there's like 17 different parts to this curse and that you have to follow. And then it's like, okay, but does Tamlin actually love her? Because he tells her like 2 or 3 times as he's sending her away, and and she can't respond. She doesn't tell you why she can't respond. And then Alice later tells her like, oh, there was no way for you to know. There was no way for you to know. You couldn't say it back. It's like, okay, so was it also part of the curse that like, no matter what, if Tamlin fell in love with the human girl that was meant to break his curse, it was also part of the curse that she could not say that she loved him back, even though she may have felt it. Like she was almost enchanted to not be able to say the words. Is that also part of it? That's a little confusing. Maybe it'll be answered for me later. Oh my God. What was the last 20% of that book? Because I am flabbergasted. I blazed through the last 20% of A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I was like, what was the point of all of this? And now I'm thinking, and that thinking has produced some thoughts. Perhaps not good ones, but some nonetheless. Please excuse my appearance. I am getting ready for streams. I will be doing like my face. So to pick up where we last left off, Feyre is going after Tamlin. She arrives at the spring court and finds everything in disarray. There's no dead bodies, but there is like blood pools and everything is all fucked up. And that was when she ran into Alice. She runs into Alice in the middle of the halls, and Alice tells her about everything pertaining to Tamlin's curse, which we talked about previously because I thought it was stupid. So Tamlin sacrifices himself and goes to join Amarantha under the mountain anyway because he doesn't want to risk Feyre's life. Now, I still don't understand why this happened because Alice said that Tamlin had like 2 or 3 more days before the 49 years were up, and he sends her away when like we're already at the point where she is about to admit her love for him. So I don't understand why he didn't wait, but I guess he just didn't want to ruin her life and he was just ready to sacrifice himself, that he would rather sacrifice himself. But I started thinking a little bit more about Fire Night because I was a bit my judgment was a bit clouded by the fact that we were introduced to Rhysand, that I completely just disregarded what happened afterwards. In the middle of the night, before sunrise, Feyre was walking around the manor, and she went to the kitchen to get a little sneaky snack, as one does, and a very crazed Tamlin finds her, much like Rhysand said that he would. It's very clear in the writing that Feyre is not having it. Like, she has been struggling with her feelings for Tamlin, but it is still at this point, like, they haven't had their first, devil's tango quite yet. So she's still struggling with her feelings for him, and like she knows that like this isn't him. She knows that like he is being overtaken by this magic and that he is not in his right mind. But still, like, the writing is very clear that she does not want him to be touching her in this way. So when he bites her and she ends up wearing it as like a badge of honor, and it turns into like this prideful thing that like, oh, things between her and Tamlin are heating up. I didn't quite understand her reasoning. Here she is being assaulted against the kitchen wall. She does not want this. And then the next day she wakes up and she's like, I'm going to wear this bite as a badge of honor. And then after that, we just get this like little Netflix montage of her and Tamlin like slowly falling in love. I think I really understated how much Feyre was basically belittled when she was living with Tamlin in the beginning. It was almost like he didn't want her to love him. He was almost jaded and like ready to sacrifice himself, and then he fell in love with her, thorns and all, and he was ready to basically risk it. Like, he was almost ready to resign himself to Amarantha, but then she came along at the very last minute. But I can't help but think back, especially after the book ends, that, you know, all the sequence of events have come to an end, that Tamlin was a dick to her. Tamlin was a straight up pussy ass bitch and mean to her. Every single day, Tamlin and Lucian would choose violence and call Feyre stupid, or like say something about her being human, or point out the fact that she's illiterate and she didn't want to talk about it. Like, her family fell from grace and her mother never educated her. She just had to jump straight into surviving and straight into protecting her family and getting food for them, which I don't understand. I still don't to this day understand why the youngest child was set to be the person to do all of this. Like, if anything, it would have made more sense for Feyre to be the eldest sister, and I would have absolutely nothing to say, because she would be the eldest sister. Of course she would like take care of everyone, but she's the youngest. And here she is with Nesta and Elaine, I mean mostly Nesta, being straight up fucking bitches for no reason. So Feyre goes to go rescue Tamlin, and she is immediately taken into custody. Like, she's caught within 2 fucking seconds, brought before Amarantha, and Amarantha's like, what are you doing here? And she's like, I'm here to rescue Tamlin. Like, stupid. If I should have been counting the number of times Feyre was being a stupid fucking bitch, because this is one of them. So, this is where things start to get stupid. So, Amarantha gives her a riddle, and then at the same time gives her, says that she will be prisoner, but she will be given 3 trials to, survive. And if she survives all 3 trials, then she can take Tamlin out of there. She doesn't specify when, which comes up later. So, but the other thing is, like, but if Feyre solves the riddle, then at any point, if she solves the riddle at any point, even 5 seconds from now, they would be set free automatically. So, Amarantha gives this riddle, and I could have answered that. Like, the riddle answer was very obvious. It's love, by the way. The answer was love. Oh my god. Like, it was so obvious. Anyone could have guessed it. But Feyre's stupid ass couldn't answer it. And she was like, but I'm illiterate. I don't know. I knew what was going to happen here, that we were going to be holding out for the climax of the story, for Feyre to say what the answer to the riddle was. Like, I knew she was going to end up completing all of the trials just because plot. So Feyre does the first trial, and it was, what was it again? I think the first trial was the Alaskan bullworm. So she's put into this giant maze almost, and a giant worm is set to go after her. So in proper Maze Runner style, she runs around this maze, distracting the worm, and we find out that the worm is blind. That's important. So the worm is blind, and it only can find itself around through senses of smell. So Feyre covers herself in mud and skulks around a little bit, but she ends up like building this pit. She ends up in the worm's lair, literally, and it's full of bones. There's bones everywhere. She breaks these bones and makes like these little spears, and then she tricks the worm into a little pit so that it falls to its death and impales itself on these bones. So she wins the first trial. But as a result, she horrendously breaks her arm. Like, the way that this is described is so fucking gross. Like, this trial in general was described really grossly. Like, Feyre was like covered head to toe in bone and icky and it was just really, really gross. But she breaks her arm, and the arm is broken to the point where she can see the bone protruding from her skin. So she goes back to the cell. They've been keeping her in the dungeon all this time, basically giving her bread and water, moldy bread and water at that. Rhysand pops in. Rhysand comes in. And I was like, okay, what's going on now? So Rhysand makes her a deal and says that he will heal her arm right then and there because she is starting to suffer from a fever. And the fever is going to kill her. Like, 110%. Like, Feyre says for a minute, like, do these people forget that I'm, like, mortal and, like, I can die? So she makes a deal with Rhysand because she knows that she's going to die regardless. And, like, Lucien was supposed to come and heal her and everything, but he's under strict watch from Amarantha, so I don't even remember if he actually came. But Feyre was, like, weighing her options, and she was like, do I wait for Lucien, or do I just make this deal with Rhysand, because I'm gonna fucking die, and I could die before Lucien finds time to sneak over to me, whereas Rhysand seems to have more freedom around. So she makes the deal with Rhysand and he heals her arm, but the bargain is that for the rest of Feyre's life, she has to spend 1 week a month at the night court with Rhysand. Doing what? I'm not sure. Playing chess or something, I don't know. I hope that it aligns with her fucking period. So she makes this deal with Rhysand, and she's not happy about it, but it's the only way that she could save her life. And after this, literally the only way that Feyre survives is because she had help from other people. Like, when I finished the book, I realized that nothing that she did was something that she did on her own. Like, maybe the worm was the only one. The Alaskan bullworm was, like, the only one she did entirely on her own. So after she makes this deal with Rhysand, she starts to notice that the meals that are delivered to her are, like, hot and ready Little Caesars, and she is able to, like, keep up her strength. Amarantha keeps sending her on all these stupid little chores. One of the chores that she's given is to pick lentils out of the fire in Rhysand's room, which is 110% what Cinderella had to do in the original story, is pick lentils out of a fire. And if she could pick the lentils out of the fire, she could go to the ball. And that was when she used the birds to get the lentils out of the fire. So do we have a little Cinderella moment where Rhysand comes into the room and, like, snaps his fingers and makes it so she gets all of them. Like, she spends forever trying to get all of them, but she just keeps finding more. So Rhysand comes into the room and he's just like, here, I'll help. And he snaps his little fey fingers and all of them appear in the bucket. And he's like, see, she did it. She could go back to her dungeon now. She's fine. So we continue on this trend of Feyre always getting help. So Rhysand is helping her out, but eventually one of the things that Rhysand has her do is join him on his nights. Like, Amarantha starts holding these parties at night, and Rhysand wants Feyre to be his consort, essentially, and, like, come with him. So one of the things that Feyre is told is not to drink the fairy wine, because the fairy wine at where they are is a lot stronger than at the spring court. But she gives in to the peer pressure and she drinks it anyway, and she goes on this, like, drug-induced, like, hallucinogenic trip and doesn't remember anything from the night before. But what Rhysand does is dress her up in these dresses that she's basically naked underneath, and you could see through the dresses, basically showing off her entire body to everybody to get a rise out of Tamlin. But then he also, like, does what the Pharaoh does in The Mummy, where he paints her body so that he knows if anybody but him touches her, which I guess is just a way for him to both ensure that nobody hurts her, but then also gets a rise out of Tamlin. So she goes with Rhysand night after night to these parties, and Tamlin, like, does not give a fuck. Like, Tamlin does not care. She keeps trying to, like, talk to him, and like he won't even look at her, and she's like, what the fuck is wrong with him? Like, he won't even acknowledge that I'm here, like fighting for his life. Fast forward, at this point I don't even remember what the second task was. No fucking earthly clue, do not remember. So, but anyway, she passes the second trial and she makes it to the third trial. And when she gets to the third trial, it is just to kill 3 innocent fairies. They're lined up and she has to kill them with an ash dagger. The first one begs for his life. The second one accepts her fate. And then the third one, which, back up a little bit, we find out Feyre and Tamlin like end up in a broom closet and they start making out. And Rhysand catches them. Rhysand is the person who catches them in the broom closet. So he's like, you dumb, stupid, sweet idiots. What the fuck are you doing? Don't you know you can get everybody killed if you do that? So he sends Tamlin out, and then I guess Amarantha was alerted that Tamlin was gone, so she went where he was, and she walks into the broom closet, and Rhysand is forcing himself on Feyre, making out with her, in the midst of admitting that the reason why he's doing all of this is because he wants to also defeat Amarantha, and the best way to do that is to use Tamlin and use his powers. So he wants Feyre to succeed, and he wants Feyre to win, essentially, so that Amarantha is defeated. So Amarantha walks into this broom closet, and she sees Rhysand and Feyre making out, and she's like, "Aw, this sweet, stupid little human. She could fall in love with another fairy so easily." And so she thinks that, she is cheating on Tamlin, essentially. But that's what Rhysand wants her to think, because he wants her to think that she's no longer a threat, I guess. But also it was better than, like, her catching Feyre and Tamlin in the broom closet. My dog won't stop barking, so I just finished off camera. But anyway, so we fast forward to the third trial, where we now know that Rhysand wants Feyre to succeed, and he has been helping her this entire time. Like, she has not done anything up until this point. Like, after he intervenes after the first task, Feyre has been getting help for everything. She's never done anything on her own. So we get to the third task, and she unmasks the first fairy, because it's 3 innocent fairies that she has to kill, because Amarantha's logic is that if you were willing to kill a fairy to end up in Tamlin's court, you'll be willing to kill fairies for his love. So she unmasks the first fairy, and it's an innocent high fae boy who, like, begs for his life. She kills him anyway. The second is a high fae woman who starts doing that prayer that Tamlin did for the fairy who ended up on his doorstep that, like, lost his wings and was bleeding to death. And he did that prayer over him. She was saying that same one. So, like, Feyre knew that this fae was, like, sacrificing herself for the cause, essentially saying, like, it's okay, you could kill me, like, do it swift and do it with purpose to make sure that she loses. So Feyre kills the second fairy. And then she goes to unmask the third fairy, and the second that she does, the Tamlin that is sitting next to Amarantha on the dais reveals itself to be the adder, actually, which I imagine to be like a little evil gargoyle, like, that's like short. I imagine it to be like an evil little gargoyle. That's it. It flies. Its feet never touch the ground, kind of thing. It just always flies around. It almost looks like a little, like if you mixed Cupid and a gargoyle. That's what the adder is to me. It doesn't seem very intimidating. So, but it reveals itself as the adder, and that the fairy that is in front of her is Tamlin. And Amarantha's logic is that if she kills him, they'll both be free, because she would have killed Tamlin, and then, you know, she'll, like, get killed or something. She'll be free and, like, have to live the rest of her life in pain. So that's her logic. But then Feyre thinks about it, and she's like, wait, she has to be calling my bluff, because she wants me to die so that she can have Tamlin forever. So, like, why would she have me kill him? So this doesn't make any sense. And then this is some massive, like, 4D chess moment from Feyre after all the dumb bitch moments. I cannot believe that we have this, like, 4D chess, like, mental gymnastics shit from her in this moment now, where Alice had told her that there was a part of the curse that she couldn't tell her and that she couldn't know. So she wasn't exactly sure like what the rest of the curse was. So then Feyre thinks back to all these moments throughout the time living at the Spring Court where like Lucian and Tamlin basically allowed Feyre to overhear conversations and just coincidentally left doors open for her to overhear. Like she's thinking about all of these things, and it was all about how people kept saying that Tamlin's heart had turned to stone, that he may be a stone-hearted son of a bitch, blah blah blah. That she thought about it and she was like, wait a second, part of his curse is that his heart has been turned to stone. And I was like, so you the metaphor was literal. And that was her big brain like 4D chess moment where she realized that the metaphor they've been using for Tamlin all this time about him being stone-hearted was that it was actually literal. So she stabbed him in the heart anyway to break the stone, and then they were all free. And Amarantha literally kills Feyre on the floor, pushing her into the ground, basically overloading her with magic. I think the scene was a little confusing. And screaming at her saying, say you never truly loved him, say you never truly loved him. And that's like her trauma coming out, because like her sister loved a human and then the human turned his back on her sister. So she wanted Feyre to be the same way. So she's like, admit that you never truly loved Tamlin. Admit it. And she actually kills Feyre. But then all of the, then like somehow Feyre is like seeing this scene through Rhysand's eyes, which I don't understand how that's possible. But all of the high lords of the other courts, like, basically give a little pebble of immortality, and it resurrects Feyre, and it actually turns her into a high fae. So she is resurrected, and now she's immortal. So it was after this point that I really started to think about Tamlin and Feyre's relationship, because Feyre is like fucking traumatized. She is traumatized about the things that she did, the fact that she killed numerous innocent fairies to get where she was, the fact that she needed all this help to get there. And Tamlin's trying to get her to talk about it, and she's like, no, I don't want to talk about my trauma right now. Like, sis needs to go to therapy. And he's like trying to coddle her. Like, she even says at one point that, like, he's been coddling her and, like, trying to get her to talk about it and then babying her. But she's been trying to take control of the situation by using sex to, like, make Tamlin stop talking about it, which, understood, it's a natural reaction. But this was when I really started to think about Tamlin as a character and whether or not he was actually a good character. And that was when I started to think about Fire Knight and the fact that he literally assaulted her, like, imbued with magic and overtaken by lust or not, he still assaulted her and she was not having it. So there was that, and then the fact that he starts to coddle her and tries to get her to talk about her trauma when she very obviously doesn't want to talk about it. But then he's also treating her like a vase that is about to break at any moment. That was when I was like, I don't think Tamlin's I know in the end, like, he does end up being really controlling. That ends up being a reason why she leaves him, I believe. Because, of course, I did not walk into this series, like, completely blinded. I do know, like, some elements and things that happened, but I don't know how and in what order. Rhysand comes to say goodbye to Feyre. And she's like, what do you mean? This is goodbye for now. Like, I have to spend a week out of every month with you forever. And he's like, yeah, that's true. So there was something that happened where he like kind of stumbled and then he disappeared into thin air. And that was the end of that. Like, all of a sudden it was like something was wrong with Rhysand and he disappears into thin air. And then Feyre was like, that's weird. Anyway, and then she, like, 3 pages later is the end of the book where she's like running off with Tamlin into the sunset, like, oh, let's go home. That's it. That's the end. My first instinct to rate this book was to rate it 4 stars, but then I honestly started to think about it and I was like, Tamlin really rubs me the wrong way. Like, at first he was fine, but by I'd say what was Fire Knight? Fire Knight was like 50% of the way through. That was the first like crack in the glass. And then by the end of the book, like, I was a little uneasy about Tamlin. Like, I know they end up breaking up and that's probably why, because some things have been spoiled for me. But I went into the ending, like the last half of the book, like kind of like, you know, it's not really a 4-star read anymore for me. I'd say more it's about like 3.5. So it was because of that I did rate it 3.5 stars. Just because I enjoyed the world. I like Feyre so far, even though she's a massive dumb bitch. I do think that she tries very hard. Like, I think that she as a character is pretty well grounded. The second favorite character of mine is probably Lucian. He has a pretty grounded backstory. But what I really liked about Feyre is that she was so dedicated to helping her family, and then she left because she had to, but then she left because it saved her family in the end, and Tamlin was supporting them, and she went back to see them, and they were like suddenly rich again. And but what really struck me is that after she was at the spring court, she didn't forget about them. Like, it had struck her a couple of times that she was actively forgetting them, that her life had changed so drastically that like her day-to-day was her new reality, that she was starting to forget where she came from. And she has this scene with Tamlin in the garden where she's wondering if her being in the spring court was actually what was best for her family. And that's when Tamlin tells her, yes, it is. Like, you leaving, am supporting them. But like, he lied to her. But that was another thing, is like Tamlin lied to her so many times about everything. And I know I said briefly before about how I wonder if there will be a point in the second or third book, whenever like things start to break between them. I wonder if there will ever be a moment where Feyre is questioning whether Tamlin ever truly loved her because of the aspects of the curse, that, you know, this perfect candidate to break his curse falls into his lap, and he almost gaslights himself into loving her, and then gaslights Feyre at the same time. So, you know, he supported her family because that's what got her to leave. He made her family rich again and fed them because it's what got her to leave them. But what was admirable about Feyre is that she didn't forget about her family. At least I think. She was constantly thinking about them and hoping that they were okay. Like, in moments where they were talking about the blight spreading, she had several times said, you know, I hope that Nesta listens. And at the first sight of danger, like, she whisks them out of there and takes all the money and runs. More than once talks about how she hopes that Nesta keeps the family safe when she can't. So in the midst of everything about Feyre trying to save Tamlin and save the fairy world from Amarantha, she does still deeply care about her family. And that's, you know, she may be a dumb bitch. She may be a dumb, stupid bitch, but she loves her family, even though they hate her. Even though they hate her. And her mom didn't even seem that great either. So, like, I don't know why she's still upholding this oath she kept to her family when her family seemed to suck. But anyway, A Court of Thorns and Roses, good foundation of a story. I did read a couple of Goodreads reviews after I finished the book about what other people thought. And of course, this has nothing to do with how I feel, but I did see some people upset about how the book was basically fantastical smut. And there really wasn't that much. There was really only like 3 in the first book. Like, there was a lot of angst and there was a lot of pining and a lot of like sensuality, but there was only like 3 scenes, really. I wonder if in later books that becomes a problem. But for me, it's not really much of an issue because I tend to enjoy smut, but that's just me. That's just my opinion. But yeah, I am comfortable rating the first book about 3.5 stars, mostly because of Tamlin as a character and Tamlin's behavior and some of the inconsistencies and issues that I found with the writing. Mostly because Sarah J. Maas is very flamboyant in her writing. She uses a lot of adjectives. I would often get lost in a scene because I would not be able to continue on because it was just describing the scenery that I couldn't focus on what was happening. I'd have to go back a page to see what was happening. Actually, this happened many times. It was because of the inconsistencies in the writing and the issues I had with reading it that it got docked down to, like, you know, 4.5 stars, because I'm not going to dock a full star for that. But it was Tamlin in his entirety, that brought it down another full star to a 3.5, just because I thought that he was okay at first, but I am not so sure about him now. That may be reflective of what I know through spoils and like through watching other content about the book, about the series, but I've never watched I don't think I've watched a video in at least a very long time, years, on the physical book. Because I won't say that like I didn't walk into the series completely blinded. Everybody knows what the series is. I just wanted to read it for myself and have that experience for myself. And that experience was a 3.5-star experience. I told you it was a long one. So that is all for me today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. If you have made it to this point in the video, if you'd like, I would love it if you left a like and a comment on the video, even if it's telling me that I suck, or tell me that you like it. I don't know. But yeah, make sure you leave a like and comment on the video and subscribe to the channel. I would love to see you stick around. This is something I would like to keep up doing because it is bringing me a lot of joy to start reading again. If you'd like to find me anywhere else, you could follow me on Twitter at HuntressGia and on Twitch at HuntressGia. And remember to drink water and be nice to each other and exude kindness and empathy with everything that you do. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.